Come along to this session. It's good to see you. And to those that are viewing this online, this is a live web stream. Welcome to you as well. Today, my name is Brian Henderson, as Richard just said. But today we are going to cover the views on world-class DB schemes. What we're going to do is look under the bonnet of these schemes and take a view in terms of what's going on around the world. Try to get an understanding of what sets them apart, including angles on regulation, funding, saver engagement, and how do these schemes become really, truly world-class. We're very fortunate to have 3 DB schemes arrangements, if you like, that discuss the changes that are going on in their own environment and how they see the DB world evolving. And as I say, we're very fortunate to have 3 excellent speakers today. We have Mary Ostermann.
Michelle Ostermann.
Oh, Michelle Ostermann, sorry, Michelle. Chief Fiduciary Officer at Railpen. Michelle will give a focus on the performance of Railpen, how the scheme's pension benefits broader society as well as its members itself. We have Mary Cover, who's the Managing Director of Pension Strategy and Enterprise Risk at the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan. And Mary will give an overview of some of the statistics around that plan, its governance, how the benefits are calculated, the scheme's conditional inflation, protection framework, and some thoughts on member engagement. And then finally, I've got Theo Langejan. He's head of the Brussels office and special advisor to the board of the Dutch Federation of Pension Funds. And Theo will give us some insight of what's happening in the Dutch system, some of the economic and demographic conditions that have precipitated any recent changes. So with that, I think maybe, Michelle, if you could start first. Okay.
I've brought 3 slides, just high-level summary for those of you not familiar with Railpen. I'm still fairly new to it myself. I've only been here since the beginning of this year, but thought I'd give a high-level overview. We have 1 slide that'll show the key statistics to give you a sense for who we are. We're about £30 billion scheme. We cover over 100, I think we're about 107 different clients consolidate to make up the £30 billion. We cover the responsibility of meeting the pension benefits for 350,000 individual members. We're the 7th largest scheme in the UK, and proudly now, after only about 5 years of development, we manage as much as 65% of all of our assets in-house. It's been a significant part of the journey, making Railpen a really unique player in this UK space. Another key thing I thought I'd share with you, instead of trying to describe the scheme and all the complexity around its benefits and the nature, as you can imagine, having 107 different clients means there's an enormous amount of diversity. Our largest section is quite large with tens of thousands of members and billions of pounds backing it. Our smallest section might have a dozen different members with maybe £1 million behind it. So we pretty well cover the entire spectrum. If there's a nature of DB in the industry or certainly even across the world, we probably have it within our backyard. So instead of trying to convey the complexity of all the DB schemes, I thought instead I'd share something with you that is meant to be sort of a high-level summary of them. I asked some folks when I joined the firm to calculate for me roughly what contributions would result into which types of benefits. Pension schemes are quite simple. Money goes in, money comes out, and in the interim it grows. And so I asked them if they could show me an average member across all of our different sections, how much of their own personal contributions they might put into the scheme would be the result of their future income. So we modeled out a generic retiree who is saving for 35 years and then retired for as much as 25 years, and the average contributions, the average withdrawals. And we quickly realized that, generally speaking, once they retire, for every pound that a pensioner takes out of the pension scheme, about 10% of what they take out are actually as a result of their own contributions. About 15% come from the monies that were invested on their behalf from their employer, and the remaining 75 pence on the pound are a result of the investment gains that we make from the asset strategy. Our investment strategy is heavily weighted to growth assets, return-seeking assets. We're about 55% equity in total backing these portfolios. We've proudly earned nearly 10% per year for about the last decade. Excluding 2008, of course, the decade has now dropped 2008. Going a little further back, it's closer to 7%. And we target roughly 6% return. That's the required return on the assets to make our plans funded. Our plans are all fully funded on a technical provision basis. We're very proud of the investment strategy. We put a lot of effort into the funding and the valuation exercise to ensure these plans are viable. It's a very cost-shared based model where there's contributions coming from employer-employee, and it's made it quite viable. We have a very strong actuarial presence in our investment strategy decision-making. The other thing I thought I'd share with you is one of the key tenets of why we're so passionate. There's a really strong culture at Railpen. I'm very proud to be a member of it. And one of the things that attracted me to the firm in particular was the appreciation for the benefit that defined benefit plans, pension plans in general, but DB in particular, add to society and the economy. Those 75 pence on the pound that are generated, the gains that are generated from the investment of these assets on behalf of those members, make pensioners more wealthy. They make them more stable, hopefully even trust us more, as we just heard. They have a more viable retirement outcome as a result of our efforts. The people that join Railpen are very proud of that. There's a nobility to what we do, and it drives the benefit of our culture. We're also quite proud of the contribution to the economy. We're one of the largest investment firms in the UK. We invest in a variety of assets spanning from private equity out to property, including public fixed income as well as equities. So we're quite diverse in our risk management, and the treatment of the capital markets are to our benefit. So I thought I'd share that. Hopefully it gives you a sense for who we are.
Thanks, Michelle. Mary, before you start, just to say, and I totally forgot to mention this, of course, please ask questions on your app, and we're happy to take some questions as we go along. So sorry, Mary.
Perfect. All right, so thank you for asking me to be here today. I'm actually thrilled to be here. I wanted to start off with a few key highlights of our pension plan. We are Canada's largest single profession pension plan, and as of January 1, we had a $10 billion surplus in a fully funded plan. At the end of June, we actually just topped our $200 billion mark from an asset perspective. We're actually quite an old plan. We were founded in 1917, but we became an independent organization as of 1/1/90. So interestingly, back in 1/1/90, all we had from an investment perspective were province of Ontario bonds to the tune of about $19 billion. So we've come a very, very long way since then and are a large international investment firm. So our average returns have been 9.7% since inception, so that's that 1/1/90 date. And not dissimilar to Railpen, 78% of our fund has come from investment returns, an equal 10%, coincidentally, from member contributions, and 12% from provincial contributions. One of the key successes to our organization is an incredibly strong governance structure with clearly articulated roles and responsibilities. So our plan sponsors are the Ontario Teachers Federation and the Province of Ontario, more specifically the Minister of Education. So what is very interesting is it's our plan sponsors that decide what the pension benefits and contributions are going to be. They decide how deficits will be dealt with. They decide how surpluses will be dealt with, and they also appoint our board members. So we have an independent professional board that oversees the administration of the benefits, oversees the investment program, but they also determine actuarial assumptions, including the very important discount rate. So currently we are at 2.75% real from a discount rate perspective, which is the lowest discount rate of all of the big plans in Ontario. I mentioned that the plan sponsors are the ones who determine contribution and benefit rates and also how to deal with surpluses and deficits. So how do they do this? Well, they actually have a very robust funding management policy, or FMP. So what's interesting is that we're currently in that middle yellowish box which is the box that says we must conserve assets for an uncertain time. So even though we have a $10 billion surplus, that surplus cannot be touched. Very effective. Some of our key member statistics will show you some of the demographic challenges that we have. We have a relatively low average retirement age of 59. Teachers typically contribute to the plan for about 26 years. However, they receive benefits for 32, and they could have a surviving spouse that receives benefits for several more years. We have negative cash flows. We paid over $6 billion of benefits in 2018 and took in $3.2 billion in contributions. So clearly, strong liquidity management is very important for our plan. We also have 133 members who are over the age of 100. So in fact, Ontario teachers live on average about 2 years longer than the typical working Canadian. So for our valuations, we actually have a teacher-specific mortality table and mortality improvement scales. And so why is it that teachers live so much longer than the typical Canadian? Well, it's a number of factors, socioeconomic factors. They have good incomes while they're working, and they have meaningful retirement benefits. They're also very educated. So we know that there's a positive correlation between socioeconomic status, education levels, and longevity. There were early bans on being able to smoke on school property. And teachers tend to be on their feet a lot during the day, not like me, who tends to sit most of my day. And then the insurance companies also tell us that married members tend to live longer than single members. Most of our people are married, and apparently the issue is there's someone there to call 911, which is our emergency helpline. I guess it's important to know that your spouse actually likes you, though. So, one thing I did want to talk about from a plan design perspective is conditional inflation protection, or CIP. So in our plan, benefits earned prior to 2010 get full inflation protection using the Canadian Consumer Price Index. Benefits earned after 2009 get indexed depending on the plan's ability to pay. So we had this issue. Our plan was aging, and we needed a mechanism for sharing the risk of downturns, because contribution increases alone were not going to protect us against a major investment catastrophe like 2008. So we needed to find a way of sharing risk with the retirees. So CIP was chosen because it's innovative, it's flexible, it has intergenerational risk sharing, which is very important to our plan sponsors, and it has an increasing impact over time as we get further and further away from that 1/1/2010 line in the sand. So if we take a look at the 2018 column, you'll see that currently we have average contribution rates of 11%. So our members contribute 11%. The province matches that contribution of 11%. If we were to lose 10% of our asset value, we would need to increase the contribution rate by 5% per plan sponsor, 16 and 16. So obviously that is not very palatable. If we use CIP instead, we could absorb that same 10% asset loss by taking inflation protection down by 32%. So what do I really mean by that? We would still be providing 100% inflation protection on all benefits earned before 2010, and 68% of inflation protection on benefits earned after 2009. So it shows the strength of CIP as a funding lever and how it promotes intergenerational equity. If we took it down to zero, as of today, we could absorb a $37 billion asset loss, and that's projected to be $75 billion by 2028. And I just wanted to close with a little bit of information on our Member Services Division, who are award-winning and have frequent interactions with our members. There's various communications, including newsletters, social media, YouTube, Twitter, all sorts of things going on a regular basis. But key is our secure member website, where our members can log on. They can do modeling to see what kind of benefit they're going to get. They can buy back service after a maternity leave. But most importantly, almost all of our retirees retire online. So in 2018, 97% of our members successfully completed all of their retirement applications online. And for those who want to speak to an expert or people who actually have a particularly complicated situation, we have a fully staffed call center as well. So that is a very quick, high-level overview of the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, and I will now pass things over to Theo.
Great.
Yeah?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, good afternoon. I don't have any slides, and I just want to convey a message concerning a huge problem we are facing. On first sight, you would think that in the Netherlands we indeed have a world-class DB system. We have a three-pillar system. Second pillar is, roughly speaking, a DB system. 90% of all employees is covered in this system because it's usually a mandatory system. And with this beautiful scheme, we have amassed a savings of 1,500 billion euros, a yearly income of 30 billion euros, and a yearly expense of 30 billion euros. And in European statistics, our elderly people are the richest of all European countries. So what is the problem? And at the same time, if you would go to this country now, you would see that everyone is very worried about pensions. And that has to do with something the previous speaker mentioned. It's trust that oils the wheels, and it's exactly the trust that is lacking. And I will try to explain that to you. And I don't agree with the previous speakers over here. My guess would be that in 10 years' time, you will not find any DB systems anymore in the Netherlands. I'll come to that too. The first thing is that you have to realize that a mandatory DB system is a beautiful system as long as you do not explain it to people. And there's no need to explain it as long as everything runs fine. But as soon as you get problems in the machine, as soon as you may not be able to meet the expectations people have, people are going to question you. And then a lot of pension fund managers are highly experts in things that nobody understands. My own wife doesn't understand what I'm doing. She doesn't mind that something is called a coverage ratio or a last liquid point, and she doesn't wonder whether mean reversion exists. But she knows one thing. When I started working, I got a letter from a pension fund. And it said, well, welcome to our pension fund. Can you choose anything? No, you cannot choose anything. Everything is mandatory, but trust us, we will supply you a pension which amounts to 70% of your last earned income when you retire. Okay. So there's no need to worry. And now you open the newspaper and you see all kinds of pension fund officials blaming the ECB, blaming Brussels, blaming the world, blaming everyone but themselves. But in reality, they have to convey the message. We cannot meet the expectations we created. And now people start worrying. Because in this beautiful DB system, which no one understands, there's all kinds of money going around. From elderly people to younger people, from younger people to career makers, well, etc., etc. You're all familiar with that. And as long as you do not explain this to people, they don't worry. But as soon as the system shows problems, as soon as you run the risk that the expectations you have are not going to be met, you start wondering, how does this system work? And then you realize they put me in this system. I didn't have a choice. But am I getting value for my money? I don't know. I worry about this. Imagine you're a 25-year-old nurse and you're entering employment in one of our beautiful hospitals. In the old days, you would have been, well, you probably would never have thought about your pensions because everything was organized in a beautiful fund, PGGM, 500 billion in assets, well, everything okay. But now you read in the newspaper that only 90% of the liabilities of this fund are met by assets. So in a way, there's 10% short. If you would have a free choice, you wouldn't join. But you don't have a free choice. So you're obliged to join a fund which is underfunded. And then this fund has another problem. They have to explain to you that 1/3 of their assets are invested in a way that now have a negative yield. Are you going to join this fund? Probably not. But there's no option. And then, well, there's a lot to be said. How do we calculate this coverage ratio? My guess would be that in a Calvinist country like the Netherlands, this is done in a much too somber way. We're calculating ourselves into the grave. But this only leads to a continuous debate amongst experts. Politicians don't know what to make of this, so they have the usual political reflex. There's a problem, we are going to solve this. They don't have any idea, but they create the expectation that they are going to solve this. And people think, well, what does that mean? They're going to solve my problem, so they're probably going to organize it, reorganize it in such a way that my pension will still be the pension I thought I would receive. And this is not going to happen. And my guess would be that where there was nothing wrong with DB systems, as soon as you start explaining the system, it's not sustainable. If you combine that with an economy that has changed from an economy where people had a 40 years employment with one employer to a world where people are self-employed. For instance, a traditional sector like the construction industry used to be an industry where unions organized everything, including the pension system. But nowadays, 50% of the hard-hat people on a construction site are self-employed. They don't have any coverage at all. And this is changing the economy. And if you realize that people do not work for the same employer for 40 years, but have a period with one employer, a period as a self-employed, a period with another employer, you might wonder whether the system we used to have, if that is still appropriate. And my guess would be it's not appropriate. Well, the same conclusion was reached by social partners and the government in the Netherlands. They entered into an agreement this year to change the DB systems to various forms of DC systems in the future. That only took us 10 years of negotiations. They were very cozy and all the experts you can mention were involved. And we never looked out of the window because it was so difficult. And after 10 years we looked out of the window and the world had changed. And we're now living in a totally different environment with a negative interest, creating all kinds of new problems, which again lead to distrust with all the people. And in a mandatory system, once people start distrusting the system, well, you can take a bet on it, but in some years' time, the mandatory system will no longer be mandatory. Thank you.
Thanks, Theo. Okay, thank you, everybody. We've got loads of questions coming through. So it's just a case of picking out some of them that probably most relevant. And one of the things that crossed my mind was yesterday in the session on consolidation. There was a questionnaire put out to the audience, and I think the response to that was, of the 5,500 DB arrangements in the UK, something like 45% of people thought that'd be down to under 3,000 in 10 years' time. And as a question has come in, perhaps related to this, and it's really to you, Michelle, actually. It says, will Railpen offer its services to non-Railpen UK DB schemes in the future?
It's an excellent question. We've been asking ourselves that question a lot lately. It feels like a natural solution because we already have 100 different clients, and adding 101 doesn't seem extreme. I think one of the strengths of Railpen is its multi-client environment. There's very few firms that would have as many clients as we have, and our governance model is built to be able to handle it. However, it is a single sector scheme. It is always meant to be just for the rail industry, just as your teachers only. And I know your plan fairly well, and I know there's a lot of contentious debate around whether they would ever open it up to anything non-teacher. And there's a lot of importance placed on the fraternal nature of the type of money we manage and for whom we manage it. And I think that brings the trust issue in. I think those whose money we're managing, we have a fiduciary responsibility to do that and do it right. At no expense to them should we attract or consolidate with another client in any way. If it could be done in a way that would benefit the current rail industry, it might be considered, but with no intention for it to ever have any implication to it. It's something that's left to be considered. We have no solution, but we've started discussing it.
Okay, thanks very much. Another question, this one to you, Mary. It's a question of clarity on the Ontario buffer. And it's saying, is it all non-growth assets, or does the 10 billion get held in growth recycled for other purposes?
That's a good question. It's actually not a segregated amount at all. So you're just comparing assets versus liabilities on our funding basis, the 275 real. And so we have 10 billion more assets than liabilities. So there's no segregation.
All right, okay, that's helpful. Another one for you, Theo. You highlight the difference between the balance sheet approach and a cash flow approach to funding, so-called world class. Maybe expand on that a little bit more?
Well, if you look at this from the point of view the question is, how can we create trust in the system? And it doesn't help when you have all kinds of experts, beginning with the Dutch National Bank, the ECB, which all have different views on how to calculate the value of your liabilities. And if you start by doing that on the most negative way you can imagine, you create your own problem. But the point to the general public is that what they see is that the experts don't agree with each other. And that creates unrest, because then you don't believe neither of them. Let me compare that to the funny thing that you probably all know, that a large part of the Netherlands is lying below sea level. There is an issue with climate change, so probably we're all going to die soon, but no one worries, no one. You probably don't even realize that Amsterdam Airport is 4 meters below sea level. 4 meters. But we have a dictatorial agency that pumps out the water, and everyone trusts that. And how come? Because they deliver. They do exactly what they say they do. And that's different in the pensions industry. We have been very proud of ourselves, so we have been telling people what they can expect. And now we can't deliver. But the previous speaker said, maybe we have not reached the phase that we acknowledge that we cannot deliver. So we're still in the phase of blaming others, which doesn't create trust. Maybe we should get back to ourselves as pension funds and tell the people, yes, we promised you something, but we are not going to deliver. We can't, sorry. And starting from that, we can invent something new.
Can I build on that?
Yeah, of course, yeah, go for it.
I just think it's really important. You raise a couple excellent points there. That to remain viable, these schemes require management, active management. These contingent benefits, these partitioned assets, the change in contribution rates, the change in benefits and promises. And if we aren't adaptive to different political environments, to different economic environments, different capital markets potential, if we're not adaptive, I think you're right. I think there is an end. But I think it's very short-term thinking to suggest that it isn't viable and it isn't ergo valuable. I would argue that if we aren't careful, there's a social need to hedge longevity. There is a gap between the ability to save and the penchant, the habit of saving, and the need to spend. And it is only growing. It is growing because people are living longer, because we've learned awful saving habits. We have too much pressure from financial institutions to buy now, pay later. We have too high of charge for debt, too much push towards using personal leverage. So I think it's a growing and inevitable pendulum that's swinging towards poverty in later in life. I think we will have 96-year-olds eating cat food. It will be on the front page of the press. It might be a decade or 2 decades away. And by then, if we walked away from an institution like a DB system that is meant to be a social offering, I believe DB fits well in a tier 1 portion of society. It's absolutely fundamental to hedge longevity. If the government doesn't offer it, or it isn't offered by these quasi-public institutions such as unionized late workers or public servants, etc. If it's not offered within society in some of those places, we run the risk, and it's the lowest end of the economic scale that are going to be hurt the most. So it worries me. If we lose trust in a healthcare system, we lose trust in a political system, we rally around trying to engineer a solution. I worry, one of the largest in the system which I revere most, having this intergenerational debate and having given up the ghost, if you will, and starting to dismantle into DC, I think that's an inevitable challenge, but you may not see it for 2 more decades or another generation. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you disagree, but I just worry that we're too nearsighted.
Yeah. Great points. There are a few questions coming in that are all broadly around a similar theme here, actually, and I'll maybe get Mary to kick off with this one. And say, broadly, what is it that really makes a scheme world-class? Is it the governance? Is it the investment performance? Is it the benefit design? Is it the social side? What is it that really makes it stand out? Or is it some kind of funny combination of all of these that makes it exemplar?
Indeed, and actually I would say all of the above.
Yeah.
I think that the governance structure is incredibly important to get that right. Having world-class investments, and I think it's very effective to have the money managed in-house. The basis points that we pay from a fee structure are extremely low compared to what we would have to pay if we invested with external firms. Having flexibility in your plan design, not just raise contributions if the plan's in trouble, but to have flexible levers. We have one particular lever, conditional inflation protection, but there's many different types of levers that you could introduce. Having transparency with your plan members and ensuring that they know the benefit that they're receiving and they recognize and appreciate that although their contributions are high, they are going to get a very big benefit down the line. So I think it's a lot of factors that come in. I think that plans like ours, they're multi-employer pension plans. I think that's probably the way of the future. My prior life as an actuary in pension consulting, and I think it's a really difficult go for the corporate plans. They have a lot of challenges, accounting standards, cash flow issues. But these very large public sector pension plans are incredibly effective. And recently in Ontario, 3 of our universities actually are creating a new, what we call jointly sponsored pension plan, very similar governance structure to the Ontario Teachers Plan. And the intention is once they are up and running and they get those economies of scale, then other universities in the province will be able to join. We have a sister plan that already actually is allowing basically anybody to come join. So they have a well-established governance structure, great investments, and if a plan wants to come and join and have their benefits going forward, they're welcome to do so. So I think big plans, consolidation, economies of scale.
Theo?
Well, I think what makes a system world-class is whether or not it delivers adequate pensions. And this is about sharing risks. So, in my view, it's still very sensible to have a combination of a pay-as-you-go system and a funded system, because you had your different kind of risks. And it's also essential in your second pillar pension that you have risk sharing between generations. And exactly there, it's not hard to explain on a technical level why that is important and how you can create profits by sharing these risks. But it's only feasible when people trust the system. As soon as you get into too heavy debates about the question whether or not the distribution between the various age groups is still fair, you will lose this battle.
Yes, agreed. I think it's founded on the concept of insurance, the pooling of risk, which is meant to cross generations. And so that's foundational. I don't know what world-class means, but I would suggest, I like innovation. I think these things are financial instruments, they have to keep up. And I'm really proud in the UK there's an evolution of DC evolving to CDC. It's sort of a collective DC. We at Railpen are kind of a collective DB, if you will, in a way. And I think there's some innovation that's coming that will bridge the two. What you describe is a little bit of what's target benefit or flexible benefits, those type of things. There'll be some variation between a DB-DC space, some kind of a hybrid, that I think will be the future of world class.
Okay, thank you. And for those that are interested, the Mercer Melbourne Global Pension Fund Index comes out on Sunday night, so you'll be able to see where you all rank. So we just got 2 or 3 minutes left, and I just wanted to finish off with a question to all of you, really. Just give me your sort of one minute answer. What do you think DB schemes will look like in, say, 10 years' time? And what do you think they should look like in 10 years' time, never mind what they might look like? And I guess, yeah, Mary, if you want to go at that?
Somewhat like my prior answer. Sustainable benefits, making sure that people are paying a reasonable amount for the benefits they're ultimately receiving. We want to ensure that people have meaningful benefits in retirement. They need to be able to live in a reasonable level of comfort and afford health care that they may need. So, yeah, that would be mine.
I'd say they'll have reduced benefits of some form to accommodate. I'd say they will be scaled, there will be more consolidation. I'd say there will be more disintermediation of the traditional investment management industry. We will bring more in-house, it's just what makes it viable. We need to be in the 50 to 70 basis point all-in cost range. And it's doable, and we can put more private assets. That's where we get the majority of our returns. We need to be able to use leverage and liquidity to be able to generate those returns.
Okay. Good points.
My guess would be that in 10 years' time, DB systems will have evolved at least in collective DC systems, and will not be the DB systems anymore as we know them, mainly because of pressure from the employer side, where on the side of the employers there's only one dominant issue. We want security on the contribution we have to pay. And in your classical DB system, you cannot give the guarantee that the contribution will be fixed. And in my experience in the Netherlands, we have a lot of discussions with employers where, in a way, the level of the contribution is less important than the question, can we fix it? So can we get certainty on the level of the contribution? And yes, you can, but that means that you have to evolve your system from a classical DB system into a CDC system.
Okay. Brilliant. Well, excellent finishing points. So there is some life in the old dog yet, as they say. can I ask everybody, before we thank the audience, just to remind you to rate this session on your app? And if you could do that, it'd be great, thank you. And just to say, I guess, thank you to the panelists for the session.